It is great to be with you. And I actually just finished my morning walk. I have a routine every Sunday because I can't be at uh, at my home church. I get up and take a walk before we go into work. And I'm usually in New York or Connecticut where our studio is. And I'm walking around the harbor there and just thinking about God's blessings and my life and giving Him thanks while I walk. Well, today, I'm walking through the public garden in Boston and walking to the Boston Harbor and thinking about our founding fathers and coming over here and starting this country and giving us an opportunity
Mm.
to live and grow here and to know that they came for religious freedoms and to give us that opportunity to worship. And it was pretty stunning just walking through and seeing the statue of George Washington and seeing some other heroes and what they did and what life was all about for them. And it just reminded me of going to the Pittsburgh Steelers as a rookie, Darren, in 1977, and sitting there and having Coach Noel in our first meeting say, don't make football your whole life. You young guys, you're coming into the league. You have to think about more than football. Life has to be more than just your job. It has to be more than just being on the field. What are you going to do to make Pittsburgh a better place to live? What are you going to do to connect with your life's work? What's your life's goals going to be? And here I am 45 years later, kind of in that mode and just so thankful that I had people like my parents, people like my grandparents, people like Coach Noel who poured into me and said, don't just get wrapped up into football. Life is more than that. And I just feel blessed to have be able to run the course that I've run.
Tony, talk about your collision with a man named Donnie at the Steelers and what he means to you and perhaps some of the backstory about that to just enliven this group.
Well, I know we're going to talk about Paul Eshelman and Doc Eshelman here in a second, and they really are critical to my whole story. I grew up in a very, very biblically based home. My grandfather was a Baptist minister. Two of my uncles were ministers. My mother taught the Sunday school class. So from early on, I'm really introduced to Christ. I am aware of what it means to be a Christian. I see great examples in my home. And I was like so many young boys growing up at that time. I processed all that, I heard it, but I wanted to be an athlete. My parents wanted me to be a student. So that was where my focus was for probably my first 20 years of life. Practicing, playing every sport I could play, going to school, getting good grades. People would have said, well, nice guy and good family and all that. But that's how I grew up. That's where my focus was. I was a senior in college, at the University of Minnesota. A guy named Paul Eshelman comes in to talk about Athletes in Action, this organization that he's got going, and how honoring Christ is going to be important for everyone, and especially for athletes and what we can do as athletes. And I heard it all, and he talked about his mission and some of the places he had been, and he talked about talking to a young special teams player for the Pittsburgh Steelers and leading him to Christ, and that was kind of his big game. That was his Super Bowl, and it was a great story. Well, little did I know that 2 years later I would be roommates with Donnie Shell. I was a quarterback in high school, quarterback in college. Donnie Shell was a defensive back for the Steelers, and Coach Noel put me in a room with him. He said, you're going to learn how to play defense. Donnie will be a great role model for you. We're roommates in training camp. And I asked him, I said, I heard a story about you. I heard this guy, Paul Eshelman, led you to Christ. He told me the whole story and, just how impactful that was to him. And then for the next 2 years, I saw him live that out and be a role model, not just to me, but to so many people. And we're going to bed at night and he's reading his Bible and asking me what I've read. And that's why I really haven't read too many Bible stories recently. I'm trying to make the team. I'm trying to learn how to play safety and reading my playbook more than anything. And then he'd get up in the morning and he'd read and he'd ask me, what I thought about this. And pretty soon it got me into the habit. And then he invited me to chapel service and invited me to Bible study. And in a short period of time, he had such an impact on me because he lived out everything my parents and my grandparents told me and taught me. And I saw it actually being lived on a daily basis in a world that I really, wanted to be in. And my mother's favorite verse in the Bible was Matthew 16:26. What would it profit a man to gain the whole world but forfeit your soul? And so I had all these messages coming to me, and I saw Donnie Shell live that out. And it was just fantastic. It really changed my life, changed the direction in my life. And it goes back to Paul Eshelman. His mission was, yes, to share the gospel and to do some projects and to do some big things. But really, his heart was with everybody he met, every athlete, every player, every coach, to make sure that they had an opportunity to receive Christ. And so him taking the time in the after a chapel service to the Pittsburgh Steelers in 1974 and changing one young man's life had an impact on me, because the guy that he changed around, Donnie Shell, then mentored me. And so all the players that I've coached and all the relationships I've made over the last 40 years have been impacted by Paul Eshelman impacting one person. And I think that's what it comes down to. So often we think and we get frustrated. I don't know what I can do. What can I do to make things better in our country? Well, you never know. When you touch one person and reach them for Christ and give them something to think about, you don't know what God's going to do with that. And I think Donnie Shell and I are a perfect example.
Indeed you are. Before you minister to the many, you first have to minister to the few. And chaplain, by its very nature, means to wear the cloak into the private places. It originally was for the kings and the queens in their private spaces. Then it was for the military, as men would prepare to go to battle and need to get right with God. Now, so often we equate it in the world of NFL and sports and these things, but a chaplain plays a central role in the life of a team. And I know that you did something special because I was close to this as well in Indianapolis, where the first call you make, right, is to the chaplain to begin setting things up. So I just want to talk about team formation for a moment and how it was that you really took that next level inside the Indianapolis Colts framework to really allow the chaplains to move in and through your building, and tell us how you then elevated that role and saw that pay dividends in kingdom ways and perhaps in earthly ways as well.
Well, I'll go back again, even before that, to my Steeler roots, as Donnie invited me to chapel services. The first time I'd ever been involved in that was 1977. Our chaplain was a guy named Hollis Half, and he led Bible studies and took us through things. And one of the first ones he took us through was Paul talking in 1 Corinthians 9, where he says, in a race, everyone runs, but only one receives first prize, so run to win. And I remember sitting there thinking, man, I've been in church all my life, and I've heard people say, hey, God doesn't care, do the best you can, and be a good teammate and all of those things. Now I'm 21 years old, and I'm hearing the chaplain say, no, God says run to win. But then the next verse is make sure we're running the right race and we're winning the right race, the eternal race, not just the temporary race. And that had an impact on me. So I'm growing, and I saw how much Hollis Half helped me grow. I got traded to the San Francisco 49ers, and Jim Stump was the chaplain there. He helped me grow. And so I always, whenever I changed teams, then I always looked for the chaplain first and said, hey, I've got to connect with this group of Christians here. I've got to connect with you. And that was always my first call. So fast forward to 1996, and I get hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've had 13 straight losing seasons. I'm the new head coach, and they're expecting me to make some changes and put us on a winning path. Well, the first call I made was to the chaplain, to Doug Gilcrease. And I said, hey, Doug, tell me about what's going on here, the spiritual climate. How have you done things in the past? How would you like to set things up? When do we want to have the chapels? Do we want to have them on Saturday night or Sunday morning? Do we want to have the players' Bible study on their off day on Tuesday? Do you want to do it at the facility? How do we want to do this? And he was kind of shocked that he would basically get to set up the schedule. We did that for 6 years, and Doug was a big part of our success there. I ended up getting fired after 6 years and going to Indianapolis. Jim Irsay called me, and he said he wanted to change the culture a little bit, connect with the city, as well as win some Super Bowls. So he hired me, and the first call I made there was to the chaplain, a guy by the name of Ken Johnson. I had met Ken at an FCA coaches camp at Black Mountain, North Carolina. And I hadn't really seen him in 6 or 7 years, but I knew he was the chaplain there. And I called him into my office, and same thing. Hey, we're going to set up the itineraries and the schedules. How are we going to do this? I want you to come into the first team meeting and tell the players how you're going to be available, where you're going to be, what the schedule is going to be. We had a great meeting. And he told me he had been the chaplain there for 14 years. He said that was the first time he'd ever been in the coach's office. And I said, well, you're going to be a regular from here on out. Don't make this your last time. And we had a great time. And we ended up, we won a Super Bowl. We did some great things on the field. But I can tell you, 2003, 2004, we had a quarterback who backed up Peyton Manning named Brock Hewart, and Brock was sensational. He would go to everybody and round them up. Hey, just like Donnie Shell, you got to get to chapel, you got to get the Bible study. We'd have 40 guys in our chapel services there with Ken and Eric Simpson. And it was a big part of why we won, because we had a unity and a togetherness that wasn't just on the field. It wasn't just for 60 minutes on Sunday, but it was built through a strong foundation.
And Tony, it ended up looking something like that. And you probably can't.
I don't know if everybody can see that picture.
I don't know if they can. I'll pass
tell
it
you the
around.
story
You can
behind that picture. We would always do a team prayer before the game. And then after the game, normal situation, you get a 10-minute, what they call a 10-minute cooling off period, where the coach has 10 minutes before they let the media in. And so we would always do our post-game prayer in that time, talk to the Lord, then we'd let the media in for their interviews. Well, that picture is at Super Bowl 41, and the Super Bowl is completely different. They let the media in right away because everybody's on deadline and they want to get the stories. So right after the game, we had this crush of people in there, cameras, recorders, interviews. And one of our players stood up and said, hey, every game for 6 years, we've always done a post-game prayer. We need to do our prayer now. So I asked all the people who were there, all the reporters and everybody, I said, if you could just shut off your recorders, put your cameras down for 2 minutes, let us have our prayer, and then we'll get back to business. Well, everybody did that except for one person. One guy ended up taking this picture. And I have to say, I was mad at him first for not following my instructions. How dare him not listen to the head coach? But that picture went online and went viral, and it really showed what we were all about as a team. And so now I'm happy that he didn't listen to me, because that is a permanent recording of the first thing that we did after the Super Bowl was get on a knee and say a team prayer and give thanks to the Lord.
Your talents were not buried, right? They were
Yes.
magnified. And as we reflect on a quick verse that I'm going to have Tony reflect on his life with, it comes from the parable of the talents, when gold bags were buried and some things happened, and he knows the story well, so I'm not going to read the full passage, but he wants to talk about this for a moment. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by a story of a man going on a trip. He called together his servants and gave them money to invest for him while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of gold to one, 2 bags of gold to another, and 1 bag of gold to the last, dividing it apportioned to their abilities. And then he left for a trip. The servant who received 5 bags of gold immediately began to invest the money and soon doubled it. The servant who had 2 bags of gold went right about doing the same thing, doubling his. But the servant that received just 1 bag of gold, he buried it in the ground and he hid the master's money for safekeeping. The story goes on, Tony, you know. Tell us what it was that you thought about not burying your talents, and how is it that you've let them shine, and any sort of extrapolations that you might have, especially as it relates to your family with Lauren, adoption, and things of that nature.
Yeah, and again, I go back to my time in 1977 and 78 with Donnie Shell as a roommate, and Donnie telling me over and over again, what are you going to do with the gifts that God has given you? He's given you some physical talents. He's allowed you to play in a great organization, and you're doing what you like to do. But what are you going to do with that? Are you just going to play ball? Are you just going to improve as a player? Or are you going to give your gratitude back to the Lord and use those talents for his kingdom? And it made me think as a young guy, because I was probably like that man who had 1 talent, who had 1 bag. I'm thinking, well, I don't really have much. And we've got all these Hall of Famers on the team, and we've got these guys who are doing tremendous things and making highlight reel plays, and I'm kind of a backup guy, and I play on special teams, and no one knows who I am, but I am part of the team. And his message to me was, whatever you have to use that, and if you do, God's going to give you more. Well, that became kind of my life verse and my thought process. Okay, God, whatever you give me, I'm going to use it for your kingdom. And sure enough, for me, year by year, I got more from the Lord and more opportunities. I went from, a guy who was happy to be on the team and excited and playing a small part, to being hired on the coaching staff, and then becoming defensive coordinator, and then becoming a head coach. But it really, I think, came back to my attitude and saying, wherever you place me, God, I can use that for your kingdom. And I never knew it at that time, when I was 22, 23 years old, that, he was going to have me be the head coach of a Super Bowl team. I never knew that I'd move 3 or 4 times and be different places, or that I'd be on Sunday Night Football, 35 years later. But I think it comes down to being faithful. And I was fortunate that I married a woman who felt the same way. My wife, Lauren, just feels like we have opportunities from the Lord, and we have to utilize those. We now have 11 children.
Come on, 11 children, come on.
The last 8 of those children have been adopted. So we've got an older group, and then we've got a group that's between 20 and 6 right now. And she just feels like that, hey, God gave us that first group, and we were supposed to use our talents to help them grow and lead them in the right direction. And then if we did that well, he would give us another bag. And he did. Our bag of 8 is challenging now, but it's fun. And we just feel like, we have to give back to God. And so it's been special. It's been fun. It's been unique. But more than anything, it's really taught me that lesson from the talents, that whatever God gives you, you have to use it to glorify him and satisfy him, and not use it for selfish reasons, not use it just for what I can get out of it. But what does God really want? What does God really need from me?
There's another man in the room, Tony, that in 66 on staff with Campus Crusade, began to build out a strategy called Explo, where 80,000 people came to a stadium to learn and be equipped and move, not just through sports, but in all walks of life. And years later, 79, the Jesus film had an explosive, evangelistic impact on countless people, billions across the world. And then the I Found It movement, and then Finish the Task, and now being consultative to just dozens and dozens of international sending ministries that are helping to reach the world for Christ, so that we can go to all the nations, right, preaching and baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I want to bring him up now, and I'm going to mic this up in such a way that he can speak directly to you, sort of the virtual world that we're in. I'm going to move my mic, but I think you'll be able to see him if he stands right here. So I'd like you to give a round of applause for Paul. That you might speak directly with a man who I know you both touched each other, and then I'll re-enter the picture here in about 5 minutes. Does that sound like a plan?
That's a good plan. I don't know if my mic isn't on yet.
Yeah, I can hear you well, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Great to see you, by the way. And for me, a wonderful tribute to Donnie. I know you had him come when you were inducted into the Hall of Fame. You had Donnie come and give the introductory speech, and that couldn't have been more perfect in my mind. And but you have done the same thing that Donnie did to you. You have passed on your faith in a miraculous, wonderful way, in both the good times and the bad times. And I think sometimes, as we watched you go through the tough times in your life, it drew us to be even more respectful of what you've done for the Lord. So I just, I counted a privilege to be in his service, and you were some of the result of that down the line, but you're passed it on and continue to do it. So God bless you. Every time you come on, I say a private prayer of thanks, whatever time of the game it is. And sometimes I got to admit, you seem to be pulling for the wrong team. And you're the analyst, and what can I say?
I'm supposed to be neutral. You're right. It's tough for me sometimes.
So anyway, thanks, Donnie, for what you mean to all of us. Somebody told me that you're the #1 sportscaster that women like to watch. And it's something about you telling the truth. And that's incredible, how the Lord has put you as a role model for Christian sportscasters. I know a number of guys in the league that are now sports commentators, and some of them have listened to you and are following you as you follow the Lord Jesus. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Paul. And Darren kind of read off some of the things that you've done and some of the projects you've been involved in. And I remember you telling me so excitedly about the Jesus film and what we're going to do, and asking me to pray for you on that, because it was such a huge project and could impact so many people. And God has allowed you to do some of those monumental things, but I still think the greatest gift that you have, and the way it impacted me, was just reaching down to one person and saying, Donnie Shell, here's the gospel in a nutshell. This is what Jesus wants to do for you. And just having that desire to help individual people, and then to see where God has taken that. It's been so awesome and such a blessing. So I'm thankful for your life. I'm thankful that you took the time at the University of Minnesota to stop and talk to one college senior and make a difference.
Yeah. Well, God is good, and you never know who that one person might be. It might choose. I remember I was speaking my first time to speak to a George Allen team, And Coach Allen at the time was he was, I think, coaching in LA, the Rams, and he was always known as somebody that he'd trade his grandmother for a veteran. They used to say, you know, he wanted veterans. That's what he cared about. And this first time I was there, he said, "Come in and sit down here." At the pregame meal it was. He said, "I've got some things I want to tell you." He said, "You're talking to $100 million, you're $100 million investment today. And it's very important what my men hear 4 hours before kickoff." So he said, "I'm going to be there in the back row listening to every word you say." I said, "Okay, Coach, good." And a couple of months later, as he was walking into the general manager's meeting, he was head coach and also general manager at that time. And he walked in, and one of the cynics, another general manager, said, "Well, here comes Alan. George, you'll try anything to win. Now we hear you got a prayer meeting going on your team." And this was in the beginning, before there were any chapel services, and we were just getting going. And he stopped dead and he said, "You know, of all the things, there's one thing I wouldn't change. Even if we had a losing season, God forbid, I wouldn't change my chapel service." He said, "Because," he said, "you know, these men know 95% of all the football they're going to know when they get to the pros. My job is to get them to play together. And I can't do that without my chapel service, because my chapel service helps my guys to play together." And the next week after that, there was a call from almost every team in the league to say, "We want one of those chapel things on our team."
Yep.
So you have exemplified standing for Christ in all of these situations. And so I thank you and say, God continue to bless your life.
Thank you.
Do through the power of technology, like so much that we've learned in the pandemic and the multiplication of ministry in ways that are unfathomably large. And that's what Sports World is taking on as you continue to find ways to reach the world. And although we didn't do a TikTok video this morning, I think that we'll touch a few people. And I know that that was all anchored by the love of Christ. As men were willing to decrease in order that he could increase, the Lord could increase. And in the midst of all that, so many lives were changed. And as we think about a closing story, Tony, I know we share a love for a little story for a man named Mordecai. I'm going to have you just tell a little story, and some of the people in the room may know it. But the setup for this particular man used all kinds of strategies, Tony, I went to read this week. He once had a car strategy where he put a hearse in front and 2,000 vehicles behind it to shut down traffic in a city so that people would know there was revival. So why don't you tell that story? I'll give a closing remark and we'll wrap us up. But are you guys having fun, first of all? Is this cool? This is cool. So tell a little story about a man named Mordecai around about the turn of the century.
Yeah, Mordecai Ham is one of my heroes. He felt the call to be an evangelist, and as you say, did a lot of things, set up a lot of meetings, worked for the Lord, but probably was kind of unknown and didn't really maybe get the notoriety and the acclaim that a lot of other people would get, and maybe wondered, where all his efforts were going, and never really got to maybe do it the way we would want to do it. But Mordecai Ham did end up, just like Paul Eshelman, talking to one young, really interested student. And he got this young man's attention, and he was able to counsel him and help him grow, and work with him as just a young country boy. And that young man's name was Billy Graham. And of course, Billy Graham went on to touch probably more people for Christ than anybody we know of. And Billy Graham would not have been Billy Graham without Mordecai Ham. And Donnie Shell would not have been Donnie Shell without Paul Eshelman. And that's, I think, the lesson of Darren's parable about the talents. You have one bag and you invest that and you touch another person, you never know where that's going to go and how that's going to impact the world for the Lord. So as we are going out and about our daily lives, every encounter that you have has the potential to be Mordecai Ham talking to Billy Graham. We won't know for years down the road. You may never know. But I am grateful today that I have a chance to say thank you to Paul Eshelman for touching Donnie Shell, who in turn touched me, just like Mordecai Ham touched Billy Graham, who Billy Graham then touched billions of people.
Who will you Mordecai for, right? Who will you advocate for in the name of Christ? What a treat to stop and think, Lord. We're so grateful. In Psalms 37, you say, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will help you, Lord. Tony, closing thought as you think about what you're taking delight in this season of life uniquely, so that you can be surrounded by prayerful men and women that love Jesus, that are going to be praying for you today, even as you take delight on the set of the studio, in your family with so many. Like, tell us how we can pray for you, what you're taking delight in.
Well, I think during this pandemic, one of the things that I've been disappointed in is I don't get out as much, and you're not talking to new people, and you're not building those relationships. And so getting the chance to do that and to get back into life as we know it and pour into other people, that's what I'm hoping for and looking forward to. So you can pray for me that you know, I can build a relationship with someone that is going to be meaningful and point more people to Christ.
Well, that's what you're doing. I'm going to turn the floor over now as we wrap, and I know you'll sign off, but just before you do, I want to introduce you to Tim Kirchmer. Go ahead and rise up, Tim. No, stand up. Come on. Tim is now taking the helm of leadership at Sports World and received that mantle and that cloak to continue to carry forward. So I want you to give him a charge as we go, and then you sign off and we'll wrap things up, Tony. But thank you for being here today, and I want you to give a quick word to Tim.
Well, Tim, I just appreciate your service. It's a great ministry. Sports in our country especially has such a big platform right now, and we can use it in ways that those 12 apostles couldn't even think of using powerfully. So I just say Godspeed, God bless, and continue to direct us in the right way. And thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Coach. And thank you so much for being with us. It's been an absolute blessing.
Good. Thank you, Coach. Have a great day at the studio with Tarico and all the guys. We love you so, Tony.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate being with you.